President Trump has departed the White House for Beijing for a highly anticipated summit with China's Xi Jinping. And many issues are at stake as these two superpowers meet, including the war with Iran and artificial intelligence. I want to bring in Chris McGuire. He is a senior fellow for China and emerging technologies at the Council on Foreign Relations. The United States and China, Chris, have a complicated relationship. On one hand, they're essential business partners. On the other, they're arguably each other's biggest adversaries. Going into the meeting this week, who do you believe has the upper hand?
Well, China certainly perceives that it has the upper hand. I think that's pretty evident from the behavior of both countries over the last few years. I think the two most important issues generally on the agenda of a bilateral meeting over the last few years have been technology and Taiwan. And over the last 7 months, the Trump administration has largely frozen technology protection measures against China, and it sent extremely mixed messages on U.S. policy on Taiwan. President Trump generally seems like he's unwilling to take actions in fear of Chinese restrictions on rare earths, and he's even bringing some of the top CEOs from the United States to China to increase our ties, which is actually the opposite of the de-risking strategy that both previous administrations have been pursuing. I think it's important just to note that the United States actually does have huge leverage over China, specifically on Chinese reliance on U.S. semiconductors and the U.S. dollar. President Trump just doesn't seem that willing to use it, which is why the Chinese think that they have the upper hand.
Let's pivot to artificial intelligence. That's also going to be a big topic of discussion this week. The U.S. and China are in a very aggressive AI race. They both want to win, but it seems like they're kind of running very different races. Can you talk about AI strategy for both China and the U.S.? And is anyone really winning at this point?
Definitively, yes. I think the United States is winning, and if the Chinese are saying that they're running a different race, it's only because they're behind in the race that matters. U.S. AI models are about 8 months ahead of China's, potentially a little bit more. That's a significant lead, but it's not necessarily an insurmountable lead. The main reason for this is that the United States just has access to way more computing power. U.S. firms make about 50 to 100 times as much AI computing power as Chinese do, and this is the impetus behind the U.S. export controls on China that restrict their access to computing power. That's the main feeder into the models. The Trump administration has actually dialed these back. So the previous U.S. strategy was to maintain as large a lead as possible over China by restricting its access to the most advanced chips. The Trump administration's reversed this. So far, few chips have actually gone, but it hasn't been closing loopholes that China's exploiting to illicitly gain access to U.S. technologies. And I'd also just note that there's discussion about having an AI safety dialogue with China, which I think in theory is a good idea. But the problem is the Chinese have shown that they use these dialogues in order to gain access to U.S. technology rather than negotiating in good faith. And if the administration is going to pursue this, I hope they do it with eyes wide open.
I want to pivot now to Iran. China is helping the Iranians, especially when it comes to military intelligence. I'm curious, is this the elephant in the room when it comes to these discussions, or does it seem like the president isn't really concerned about that?
Well, it's definitely awkward, or it should be awkward. I mean, China is providing direct military and intelligence support to Iran that's being used to target U.S. service members on the battlefield. That's very significant. I mean, the Biden administration had significant concerns about the Chinese doing similar activities with the Russians in Ukraine, but we didn't actually have soldiers that were on the battlefield there, and we do over Iran. President Trump should not be tolerating this. We should be demanding that the action stop. I do think it's remarkable that we would send a delegation of America's top CEOs to a country that's engaged in this activity. Recognize that the relationship ultimately is complicated, but I think it really this should be a red line. We could actually have a kind of fruitful relationship, but we'll see what comes out of the summit.
You mentioned Taiwan earlier in this conversation. I'm curious, how does Taiwan factor in to all of these discussions? We've been watching closely as to what happens with the war in Ukraine and now Iran. Are we seeing at this moment, is China seeing this moment as an opportunity, perhaps?
So I don't think the Chinese are planning to move on Taiwan now, but I do think they will be closely watching the president's comments on Taiwan and actions on Taiwan at the summit, and this is going to be a major topic. It is incredibly important that the president not change U.S. policy on Taiwan. Even small linguistic differences actually will have hugely consequential impacts on U.S. alliances and actually on the debate in Taiwan itself. It's also very important that the president not agree to negotiate arms sales to the Taiwanese with the Chinese. This has been longstanding U.S. policy that these two are completely separate. There's been some indications that the president may be willing to do that. The President Trump should be commended for agreeing to like very large arms sales packages to China, but those haven't actually gone through. And until we see those go through, there's going to be a lot of questions about this. Taiwan's security is paramount for U.S. economic security, for U.S. national security. It's very essential that we kind of maintain the status quo in the Straits. And this is certainly China's top goal over the medium to long term is to change it. And fundamentally, it's something that we just have to maintain our existing policy rock solid and not deviate. If small changes in language will be really closely watched in both Beijing and Taipei, and I think the president should be very careful.
Chris McGuire, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.